My daughter sent me a box of handmade birthday chocolates. The next day she asked, "So, how were the chocolates?" I smiled and said, "I gave them to your husband and the kids, they love sweets." She went silent. Then whispered, terrified, "Mom, you did what?" My hands are shaking as I type this. 3 days ago, my world cracked open in a way I never anticipated, and the person holding the hammer was someone I raised, nurtured, and loved unconditionally for 34 years. The betrayal cut so deep that I still catch myself hoping this is all a nightmare I'll wake from, even though I know better. Let me back up. I'm Diane, 59 years old, recently retired from a career in hospital administration spanning 3 decades. My husband, Paul, passed away 7 years ago from pancreatic cancer, a brutal, swift illness that took him from diagnosis to death in 11 weeks. We had 2 children together, my son Marcus, 37, who lives in Seattle with his wife Jennifer and their twin daughters, and my daughter Shelby, 34, who lives 40 minutes away in the suburbs with her husband Derek and their 3 kids, Connor, 11, Maddie, 8, and little Ethan, who just turned 5. Since Paul died, Shelby and I have had a complicated relationship. Something shifted in her after the funeral in ways I couldn't quite name. At first, I attributed it to grief manifesting differently in people. She became colder, more transactional in our interactions, as if every conversation had a hidden agenda I wasn't meant to see. Phone calls dwindled from weekly to monthly. Visits felt obligatory rather than warm. She'd check her watch constantly, make excuses to leave early, engage with me in surface-level pleasantries that never dug deeper than the weather or the kids' school activities. When I asked if something was wrong, she'd deflect with excuses about being busy, exhausted from motherhood, overwhelmed by life's relentless demands. I accepted these explanations because I wanted to believe them. Motherhood is exhausting. Marriage takes work. Life does pile up. And the alternative, that my daughter simply didn't want to spend time with me, was too painful to contemplate. What I couldn't ignore was the increasing frequency of her questions about money. About the house. About Paul's life insurance policy and where exactly those funds had gone after I'd settled his estate. About whether I'd updated my will since his passing and who stood to inherit what. At first, these inquiries seemed reasonable. Perhaps she was just ensuring I was financially secure, acting as a concerned daughter worried about her mother's well-being in widowhood. But over time, the questions took on an edge. A sharpness that made my stomach tighten whenever she steered conversations toward finances. "Mom, that house is way too big for one person," she said last Thanksgiving, standing in my kitchen while I prepared the turkey and she nursed a glass of sparkling water, having arrived precisely at dinner time rather than early enough to help. "Have you thought about downsizing? You could move into a smaller condo, invest the difference. Or, help Derek and me with the kids' college funds. Connor's going to need tuition money before we know it, and private school applications are already getting competitive." I told her I wasn't ready to leave the home where I'd raised my children, where every corner held memories of Paul, the kitchen where he'd burned countless Sunday breakfasts, the backyard where he'd built the kids a treehouse that still stood weathered and beloved. She rolled her eyes in a way that made me feel foolish for having sentiment, for prioritizing memory over practicality, for not viewing my home primarily as an asset to be liquidated. The tension escalated dramatically 8 months ago when I made a decision that shall be deemed unforgivable. My sister-in-law, Arlene, Paul's younger sister, was diagnosed with early-onset dementia at 63. She'd never married, had no children, and her savings were modest at best after a career as a public school teacher in an underfunded district. Watching her struggle to navigate the healthcare system while her cognition deteriorated broke something in me. She'd call me crying, unable to remember what day it was or whether she'd taken her medications. She'd get lost driving to the grocery store she'd visited for 20 years. She'd forget mid-sentence what she was saying and sit in helpless frustration as the words scattered from her mind like startled birds. I couldn't stand by and do nothing. Arlene had been there for me through every crisis of my adult life. She'd held my hand through 2 miscarriages before Marcus was finally born. She'd moved into our guest room for 3 months during Paul's illness, handling grocery runs and laundry and the 1,000 small tasks that pile up when you're spending every waking hour at a hospital bedside. She'd sat with me through the dark months after his death, bringing casseroles I couldn't eat and sitting in silence when words were too much. So I helped. I used a significant portion of my savings, enough to make a real difference, to move Arlene into a quality assisted living facility that specialized in memory care. Clean, bright rooms. Staff trained in dementia support. Activities designed to slow cognitive decline and maintain dignity. I set up a trust to cover her ongoing expenses for as long as necessary. It was the right thing to do, The only thing I could do, and I made the decision without regret. When Shelby found out, her reaction was volcanic. That money was supposed to be ours, she screamed over the phone, her voice so loud I had to hold the receiver away from my ear. Mine and Marcus's. Our inheritance. You had no right to give it to her. She's not even your real sister, she's Dad's sister. She should have planned better for her own retirement. Why is her failure to save adequately suddenly our problem? I tried to explain that it was my money to do with as I chose. That family meant taking care of each other, especially those who couldn't care for themselves. That I still had plenty to live comfortably and would leave behind an inheritance, just perhaps not as large as she'd imagined. That Arlene deserved dignity in her final chapter after a lifetime of giving. She hung up on me mid-sentence. The click of the call ending felt like a door slamming. For weeks afterward, she refused my calls. My texts went unanswered. I left voicemails that disappeared into silence. When she finally resurfaced, it was with a stiff formality that never fully thawed, polite on the surface, fractured underneath, every interaction carrying the weight of unspoken accusations. Then came my birthday. Last Tuesday, I turned 59. Marcus sent flowers, a gorgeous arrangement of sunflowers and daisies that brightened my kitchen for days, and called to sing an off-key rendition of the birthday song with his daughter squealing in the background, interrupting each other with shouts of "Happy birthday, Grandma." It was chaotic and perfect and exactly what I needed to start my day with joy. Shelby's gift arrived by mail that afternoon. A beautifully wrapped box containing an assortment of handmade chocolates, dark chocolate truffles, milk chocolate caramels, white chocolate raspberry creams. The attached card read, "Mom, I made these myself. Thought you deserved something special this year. Let's put the past behind us and start fresh. Love, Shelby." The gesture surprised me more than I can adequately express. Shelby had never been crafty or domestic. Her kitchen prowess extended to reheating takeout and occasionally scrambling eggs. The idea of her spending hours tempering chocolate, molding confections, mastering the delicate art of ganache, it seemed wildly, impossibly out of character. But I wanted so badly to believe she was extending an olive branch, that the rift between us might finally be healing, that I pushed my skepticism aside and let hope fill the space instead. Here's the thing, though, I've been managing type 2 diabetes for the past 4 years. My doctor diagnosed me shortly after Paul's death, when stress and grief had sent my eating habits into chaos. I've worked hard to keep it under control through diet and exercise, testing my blood sugar religiously, avoiding the sweet treats I once loved. Indulging in a box of chocolates, no matter how lovingly made, would have been a reckless choice. I set the box on my kitchen counter, intending to admire the craftsmanship without consuming the contents, thinking perhaps I'd offer them to a neighbor or bring them to my next book club meeting. The next afternoon, Derek stopped by unexpectedly. He said he was in my neighborhood for a work meeting that ran short and wanted to drop off some paperwork Shelby had forgotten to include with my gift, a certificate for a spa day at a place downtown. It seemed odd that he'd make a special trip for something so minor, something that could easily have been mailed or handed over at our next family gathering. But I invited him in for coffee anyway, grateful for the company, happy to see my son-in-law who had always been kind to me even when his wife grew distant. While I was preparing the coffee in the kitchen, Derek noticed the chocolates on the counter. "Oh wow, Shelby mentioned she made these," he said, his tone casual but something about it not quite landing naturally. "Can I try one? She wouldn't let me taste test at home, said they were exclusively for you." Something in his voice gave me pause. A rehearsed quality, like he was reading from a script someone else had written. But before I could analyze it further, he'd already popped a chocolate into his mouth, chewing with apparent pleasure. "These are incredible," he said. "Seriously." She outdid herself. "You should try one, Diane." On impulse, I made a decision that would unravel everything. "Derek, why don't you take the rest home to the kids? Connor has such a sweet tooth, he's always asking me for candy when he visits, and Maddie's been begging for treats every time I see her. I can't eat them because of my diabetes, and they shouldn't go to waste. It would make me happy knowing my grandchildren enjoy them." He hesitated. Just for a second, so brief I almost missed it. A flicker of something crossed his face, uncertainty, maybe, or discomfort, or the rapid calculation of someone reconsidering a plan. Then he smiled and said, "That's really generous, Diane. They'll be absolutely thrilled." He left with the box tucked under his arm. I watched from the window as his car pulled away, a strange unease settling in my chest that I couldn't quite explain. The following evening, Shelby called. Her voice sounded strange from the first syllable, tight, controlled, like she was choosing every word with surgical precision, each syllable placed carefully to hide whatever lay beneath. Hey, Mom. Happy belated birthday again. So, how were the chocolates? Did you enjoy them? I smiled, genuinely warmed by what I perceived as her interest in my enjoyment of her gift. Sweetheart, that was so thoughtful of you. I was really touched. But you know I can't eat sweets anymore with my diabetes. The doctor's been very strict about my sugar intake. I gave them to Derek and the kids when he stopped by. They love that kind of thing. I'm sure they've demolished the whole box by now, knowing how Connor and Maddie are about chocolate. Silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, thick, wrong. The kind of silence that makes the air itself seem to solidify. Then, barely above a whisper, her voice cracking on every syllable, Mom. You did what? I gave them to Derek when he came by yesterday. He seemed happy about it. Is something wrong? Did I do something I shouldn't have? Her breathing changed. Rapid, shallow, panicked, the breathing of someone whose carefully constructed plan has just collapsed into rubble. Mom, I have to go. I have to go right now. The line went dead. For a long moment, I stood in my kitchen holding my phone, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Why would she care so much about who ate the chocolates? Why the terror in her voice, terror, not disappointment or mild frustration, but genuine, bone-deep fear. A cold suspicion began forming in my mind, taking shape like frost on a winter window, but I fought against it. Surely I was misinterpreting. Surely there was a reasonable explanation. 2 hours later, my phone rang again. This time it was Derek. Diane. His voice was hoarse, strained, barely recognizable. Something's happening. Connor and Maddie are sick. Really sick. Vomiting, severe stomach cramps, they're barely conscious and responsive. We're at the emergency room right now. Ethan didn't have any, thank goodness he hates chocolate, always has, won't touch the stuff, but the other two. They ate almost half the box between them after dinner. They were fighting over who got more. My blood turned to ice. What are the doctors saying? They're running tests. They don't know what's wrong yet, but they think it might be poisoning of some kind based on the symptoms. Diane, where did those chocolates come from? Did you make them yourself? Did you add something to them? Derek, Shelby made them. She sent them to me for my birthday. She told me, her card said, she made them herself. Another silence. Then, slowly, as if the words were being dragged from somewhere deep, that can't be right. Shelby can't even boil water without burning something. She sets off the smoke detector making toast. She didn't make those chocolates, Diane. She told me she ordered them from some specialty shop online, had them shipped directly to your address. The lie unraveled in my hands like a spool of thread falling to the floor, endless and impossible to gather back up. I told Derek to call the police immediately. I told him to save any remaining chocolates for testing, to not let anyone touch them, to preserve them exactly as they were. Then I hung up and sat down heavily at my kitchen table, my mind racing through implications I didn't want to accept, conclusions I couldn't bear to draw. My daughter had sent me poisoned chocolates for my birthday. She had intended for me to eat them. She had lied about making them herself to add a personal touch that would encourage me to indulge despite my dietary restrictions. When I mentioned giving them away, her reaction wasn't confusion or mild disappointment, it was terror. Pure, unfiltered terror. Terror that her own children might suffer what she'd planned for me. I don't know what comes next. The police are involved now. Connor and Maddie are in stable condition according to Derek's last text, but they're being kept overnight for observation and additional testing. Shelby hasn't responded to anyone's calls or texts. Derek is in shock, caught between loyalty to his wife and the dawning horror of what she may have done. And me? I'm sitting alone in the house my husband built, wondering how I raised a daughter who would try to kill me for money she felt entitled to, and whether the love I poured into her for 3 decades meant anything at all. I'll update when I know more. Update 1, 4 days later, the toxicology results came back. The chocolates contained a concentrated dose of antifreeze, ethylene glycol, carefully mixed into the ganache filling. According to the detective assigned to the case, the amount in each piece was calibrated to cause severe kidney damage over time if consumed gradually, or acute poisoning if someone ate several at once. The substance has a sweet taste that blends easily into chocolate, making it virtually undetectable to anyone eating the confections. Connor and Maddie ate 5 chocolates between them. 5. The doctors caught it early because of Derek's quick thinking. He brought the remaining chocolates to the ER and insisted they test for everything, refusing to accept initial suggestions that it might be food poisoning or a stomach bug. Both children underwent emergency dialysis and are expected to make full recoveries, though they'll need monitoring for potential long-term kidney effects. The damage could have been so much worse. If Derek had waited even a few more hours before seeking treatment, or if the children had eaten more chocolates, or if Ethan had overcome his aversion to chocolate and joined in, I can't let myself think about those possibilities for too long. Maddie keeps asking why her tummy hurts so much. Connor, old enough to understand that something terrible happened, has barely spoken since leaving the hospital. He just stares at the wall, curled in on himself, refusing to engage with anyone. The pediatric psychologist says it's shock, that children process trauma differently than adults, that it will take time. Shelby was arrested at a motel 60 miles from town 2 days ago. She'd been hiding there since the night of the emergency room visit, paying cash, using a prepaid phone she'd apparently purchased weeks earlier, another sign of premeditation. Police traced her through a gas station surveillance camera that captured her license plate as she fled town. Derek filed for emergency custody of the children the morning after her arrest. He went to the courthouse as soon as it opened, barely able to speak through his shock and grief, but determined to protect his kids from their mother. The judge granted his request without hesitation after reviewing the police report. He's staying with his parents now, all 3 children in tow, shell-shocked and struggling to reconcile the woman he married with the one who poisoned their children while trying to murder her own mother. I've spoken with him twice since everything unfolded. The conversations are brutal in their awkwardness, neither of us knows what to say. What words could possibly be adequate for this situation? He apologized, absurdly, as if any of this were his fault, as if he should have somehow known what his wife was planning. I told him the only thing I know for certain, those children need their father, and he needs to be strong for them. The investigation has uncovered a disturbing amount of premeditation. Detectives obtained a warrant for Shelby's laptop and recovered her search history from the past several months. She'd researched untraceable poisons, symptoms of antifreeze ingestion, how long before antifreeze causes death, antifreeze sweetness masking detection, and inheritance laws after parental death. The searches were methodical, spanning weeks, increasing in specificity as she refined her plan. She'd even looked up whether life insurance policies pay out in cases of accidental poisoning versus proven homicide. My daughter didn't snap. She didn't act in a moment of rage or desperation or temporary madness. She planned this with cold, calculated precision over the course of months. She researched, sourced materials through anonymous channels, practiced the preparation. The police found a second batch of contaminated chocolate in her garage, apparently a test run to perfect the mixture, and waited for the right opportunity. My birthday gave her a perfect excuse to send food without raising suspicion. What strikes me most, in the endless hours I spend replaying everything, is how close it came to working. If I hadn't been diabetic, I would have eaten those chocolates. Probably not all at once. I've never had much of a sweet tooth even before my diagnosis, but steadily, over several days, a treat here and there. The symptoms would have crept up gradually. Nausea, fatigue, confusion, loss of coordination. By the time anyone thought to test for poisoning rather than assuming I was simply getting sick with age, the damage might have been irreversible. My kidneys might have failed. My brain might have swelled. I might have died alone in this house, and Shelby could have played the grieving daughter, collected her inheritance, and moved on with her life. The thought makes me physically ill. Marcus flew in from Seattle the day after Shelby's arrest, leaving Jennifer to handle the twins alone so he could be here. Having him here has been a lifeline I didn't know I needed. He doesn't try to make sense of what happened or offer explanations that might soften the blow. He doesn't fill the silence with meaningless comfort or false optimism. He just sits with me, makes tea I don't drink, and lets the quiet exist without trying to force conversation. Yesterday, he asked me something I've been avoiding. We were sitting on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, and he said quietly, "Mom, are you going to visit her?" I don't have an answer. Part of me wants desperately to look her in the eyes and demand to know why. Was it really just about money? Had her resentment festered for so long that she convinced herself I deserved to die? Did she ever love me, or was our entire relationship a performance I was too blind to see through? Were there signs I should have recognized, moments where intervention might have changed her trajectory? Another part of me, a larger part, if I'm honest, never wants to see her face again. The preliminary hearing is scheduled for next week. Shelby has been charged with 1 count of attempted murder in the first degree, 2 counts of reckless endangerment of a child resulting in serious bodily harm, and possession of a toxic substance with intent to cause death. Her lawyer is apparently angling for a mental health defense, claiming she suffered a psychological breakdown related to financial stress and unresolved grief over her father's death 7 years ago. Financial stress. As if that justifies trying to kill your mother for an inheritance you felt entitled to inherit. Derek told me something yesterday that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. We were sitting in his parents' living room while the kids napped, and he said Shelby had been pressuring him for months to ask me directly about my will, how much they stood to inherit, whether I'd changed anything after helping Arlene, whether I planned to leave the house to them or sell it. He'd refused each time, finding the topic morbid and inappropriate, uncomfortable with the idea of asking his mother-in-law about her death plans. In response to his refusals, Shelby had grown increasingly hostile. She accused him of not caring about their family's future, of being content to struggle financially while her inheritance sat in my bank account, in her words, rotting. She said I was selfish for keeping money I didn't need when my grandchildren could benefit from it now. She said I valued Arlene, a woman who wasn't even blood related to me, more than my own daughter and her children. Rotting? She saw money I'd worked my entire life to save as rotting because it wasn't in her hands. She saw my continued existence as an obstacle to money she considered already hers. My life was an inconvenience standing between her and financial security she believed she deserved. The mother who held her through childhood nightmares, who attended every school play and soccer game and dance recital, who helped pay for her wedding and babysat her children whenever she asked, I was reduced in her mind to an obstacle, a problem to be solved, an equation to be balanced by subtracting me from the world. I've cried more in the past 4 days than I did in the entire year after Paul died. Grief for a living person feels different than grief for the dead. It's tangled up with anger, betrayal, and the inescapable knowledge that every happy memory is now contaminated by what came after. Every photograph of Shelby as a child, every milestone I celebrated, every moment of pride I felt watching her grow, all of it now carries the shadow of the person she became. One more thing before I go. Several people in the comments of my original post asked about the spa day certificate Derek brought over, whether it was a genuine gift or part of some elaborate secondary plan. I wondered the same thing, so I called the spa to verify. The certificate was fake. The spa had no record of any purchase under Shelby's name or mine. The paper was convincing, professionally designed, complete with terms and conditions and an expiration date, but entirely fabricated. It was a prop, nothing more. A reason to get Derek into my house to ensure the chocolates were where they should be, that I hadn't thrown them away or given them to a neighbor, that the plan was proceeding as intended. Every detail, every layer of this nightmare, reveals more calculation than I can stomach. I'll post another update after the hearing. Update 2, 3 weeks later. The preliminary hearing happened. Shelby appeared via video link from the detention center, and seeing her face on that screen, gaunt, pale, her hair unwashed and pulled back in a limp ponytail, dark circles shadowing her eyes, stirred something complicated in my chest. Pity, maybe. Or the ghost of maternal instinct that refuses to die even when logic insists it should. She pleaded not guilty. Her attorney, a sharp-dressed woman with an aggressive courtroom manner, argued as expected that Shelby wasn't in her right mind when she acquired the materials and crafted the poisoned chocolates. She painted a picture of a woman drowning in anxiety over her family's financial future, pushed to a breaking point by her father's death and her mother's reckless distribution of assets to extended family members rather than to her own children. The prosecutor dismantled this narrative piece by piece. She presented the search history spanning 3 months. The carefully ordered supplies from multiple vendors, paid for with gift cards purchased in cash at different stores across town. The test batch found in the garage, wrapped in plastic and hidden behind gardening equipment. Text messages between Shelby and an acquaintance, a former co-worker from her first job out of college, where Shelby had asked, hypothetically, how someone might access antifreeze without leaving a traceable purchase record. The friend, horrified when contacted by police, provided screenshots that painted a damning portrait of deliberate, sustained premeditation. The judge bound the case over for trial. Bail was set at $750,000, an amount no one in our family could possibly raise, and the judge made clear that even if someone tried, she considered Shelby a significant flight risk given her attempted escape after the children fell ill. Shelby will remain in custody until her trial date, currently scheduled for late spring. After the hearing, I did something I swore I wouldn't do. I requested a visit. I need to explain why, even though I'm not sure I fully understand it myself. For weeks, I've been haunted by questions that have no good answers. How does a daughter become someone capable of killing her own mother? Where did I fail her so profoundly that she decided my death was an acceptable solution to her problems? Was there a moment, a conversation, a decision, a turning point, Where things could have gone differently if I'd only noticed, only intervened, only said the right words. I thought facing her might bring some form of clarity. Or closure. Or at least an ending to the endless loop of speculation cycling through my mind every night when sleep refuses to come. The visitation room was smaller than I expected. Plastic chairs bolted to the floor, designed for discomfort rather than lingering. A scratched plexiglass divider separating visitors from inmates. The smell of industrial cleaner and despair permeating everything. Shelby was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit that hung loose on her frame. She'd lost weight since her arrest, her wrists cuffed in front of her. She looked older than her 34 years, aged a decade in 3 weeks. Her eyes, when they met mine, held something I couldn't quite read. Defiance, maybe. Or simply exhaustion beyond caring. We stared at each other for a long moment, the plexiglass between us reflecting our faces back at each other, before she spoke. I didn't think you'd come. Neither did I. She looked down at her hands, picking at a hangnail on her thumb, the small fidgeting motion achingly familiar from her childhood. I suppose you want me to apologize? To break down crying and beg for forgiveness? I want you to explain. I want to understand how we got here. What's there to explain? You already know everything. The police made sure of that. They've shown you the search history, the texts, the whole pathetic paper trail. I know the facts. I don't understand the why. I need to know why. She laughed, a short, bitter sound that echoed off the concrete walls and made the guard by the door shift uncomfortably. The why? You want a neat little explanation that makes sense. A villain monologue where I tell you about my traumatic childhood or some dark secret that justifies everything. Some moment where you failed me that explains how I ended up here. I want the truth, whatever it is. The truth is that you chose Arlene over your own grandchildren. That's the truth. You took money that should have been theirs, their education, their futures, their opportunities, and gave it to someone who isn't even blood. Dad's sister, not yours. She should have planned better for her retirement. Her failure to save adequately for old age shouldn't become our punishment. Your father loved Arlene. She's his sister, his only sibling. And he left that money to me, Shelby. To spend as I saw fit, because he trusted my judgment. But you didn't see fit to help your own daughter. Derek lost his job last year, did you know that? A reorganization at his company. He was out of work for 4 months, applying to dozens of positions, rejected over and over. We nearly lost the house. Mortgage payments piling up, credit cards maxed. I asked you for help, one time, and you said no. I remembered that conversation clearly. She'd called asking for $50,000 to consolidate some debt. I'd offered to look at their finances together, to help them create a budget, to co-sign a lower interest loan if they needed one. I'd offered practical solutions, real help. She'd refused anything other than a direct cash transfer with no accountability. I didn't say no. I said I wouldn't hand over that much money without understanding where it was going. You refused to discuss it further. You wanted a check, not help. Because it was humiliating, she snapped, her voice rising. Having to justify my expenses to my own mother like I'm a child asking for an allowance. Spreadsheets and budgets and oversight. Meanwhile, Arlene gets a blank check, no questions asked, because she managed to outlive her savings with her pitiful teacher's pension. Arlene has dementia, Shelby. She can't advocate for herself anymore. She doesn't know what day it is. She sometimes doesn't remember my name. She has no one else to look out for her. And whose problem is that? Why should I care about an old woman who barely remembers my name? Why should my children suffer, though without opportunities, so she can live out her days in some fancy facility with activities and nice bedding? The conversation continued in this vein for nearly an hour. Every question I asked was met with deflection, rationalization, or blame shifted elsewhere, onto Derek's unemployment, onto the economy, onto my supposed favoritism toward Marcus, onto Paul's death and my failure to properly grieve alongside her. At one point she accused me of loving Arlene more than her because I'd spent more time at the facility than at her house. At another, she suggested I had deliberately provoked her by flaunting my financial security while she struggled. Never once did she express remorse for what she'd done. Never once did she ask about Connor and Maddie, the children she'd accidentally poisoned in her attempt to murder me. Never once did she inquire about their recovery, their trauma, their nightmares. Her focus remained fixed on her own grievances, her own suffering, her own sense of cosmic injustice at having been denied what she believed was rightfully hers. Toward the end of our visit, when the guard announced we had 5 minutes remaining, I asked the question that had been lodged in my throat since I walked into that room. When you planned this, when you ordered the supplies and made those chocolates and put them in the mail, did you ever hesitate? Did you ever think about what it would mean? What it would do to the family, to your children, to Marcus, who would lose his sister and his mother in one blow? She met my eyes for the first time in several minutes. Her gaze was flat, unreadable. I thought about how much easier everything would be. How Derek and I could finally breathe, pay off our debts, give the kids everything they deserve. How they could have opportunities they're being denied because you're hoarding wealth you don't even need, living alone in that big house, spending money on strangers. And me? Did you think about me at all? About what it would feel like for me to die slowly, poisoned by my own daughter, confused and sick and not knowing what was happening to my body? A long pause. The guard shifted again by the door. Then, quietly, almost a whisper, I tried not to. That was the moment I understood there was nothing left to salvage. Whatever love had once existed between us had been corroded beyond repair, not by a single act, but by years of resentment I'd failed to recognize, entitlement I'd perhaps inadvertently nurtured by trying to give her everything, and a fundamental emptiness in her that no amount of money or attention could have ever filled. I stood up to leave. Shelby called after me. Mom, wait. I turned at the door. Are you going to testify against me? Yes. Even knowing you could put me away for decades? Even knowing what that would mean for my life? I looked at her, really looked at her, for perhaps the last time. The face I had loved since the moment she was placed in my arms, now belonging to a stranger. You tried to kill me, Shelby. You poisoned your own children in the process. The consequences of your choices are not my responsibility to soften. I walked out without looking back. The heavy door closing behind me felt like the ending of something I'd been holding on to for far too long. The days since that visit have been strangely peaceful. Not happy, I don't know if I'll ever truly be happy again in the way I was before, but settled. The chaos of unanswered questions has quieted somewhat. I know now that there is no satisfying explanation, no hidden trauma that excuses her behavior, no redemption arc waiting in the wings. Shelby made her choices with clear eyes and a calculating mind, and she will face the consequences. Derek has filed for divorce. The papers were served at the detention center last week. He's also begun working with a therapist who specializes in helping children process traumatic events, bringing all 3 kids to weekly sessions. Connor and Maddie are doing better physically, their kidney function has normalized, the dialysis a distant memory, though the psychological recovery will take much longer. Little Ethan, mercifully oblivious to the worst of it, continues to be his cheerful, silly self, a source of light in an otherwise dark period. I've been spending more time with my grandchildren than ever before. Derek encourages it, and I think the kids need the consistency of someone who loves them unconditionally, who represents stability in a world that suddenly makes no sense. Last weekend, I took all 3 to the zoo. We looked at the elephants for nearly an hour. Ethan was fascinated by how they used their trunks, and ate overpriced ice cream that dripped down our wrists, and didn't talk about anything heavier than which animal made the funniest face. It was, for a few hours, almost normal. Marcus has returned to Seattle but calls every night without fail. He's processing all of this in his own way, quieter than me, more internal, less inclined to talk through his feelings. His wife told me he's been having trouble sleeping, replaying old memories, trying to identify signs he might have missed in his sister's behavior over the years. I've told him there's no point in excavating the past for warnings we didn't know to look for. We can only move forward. And Arlene. Dear Arlene, who doesn't fully understand what's happened but somehow senses that I need comfort. On my last visit to her facility, she took my hand in both of hers and said, "You look tired, honey. Whatever it is, it'll be okay." It always is, eventually. She doesn't remember my name anymore, most days. But she remembered that I needed kindness, and she gave it freely, without expectation, without agenda. The money I spent on her care was worth every penny for moments like that. I've updated my will with the help of my attorney. The house and the majority of my remaining assets will go to Marcus and, in trust, to my grandchildren, all 3 of them, including Shelby's kids. I will not punish them for their mother's sins. But I've also included a provision that Shelby is to receive nothing. Not a penny, not a photograph, not a single memento from the life we once shared. She forfeited any claim to my legacy the moment she decided my death was worth more to her than my life. The trial is still months away. The prosecutor is confident in her case, but warns that anything can happen in a courtroom, that juries are unpredictable, that defense attorneys can spin compelling narratives from thin air. Shelby's lawyer continues to push the mental breakdown narrative, hiring experts to testify about stress-induced psychosis, diminished capacity, the the psychological effects of parental loss and financial anxiety. Whether a jury will find that argument compelling remains to be seen. Regardless of the legal outcome, my daughter has already received her sentence in a sense. She's lost her children to her husband's custody. She's lost her marriage to divorce papers served through prison bars. She's lost her freedom, her reputation, her standing in every community she inhabited. She will never again be welcomed in my home or embrace her children without supervision and court approval. The inheritance she was so desperate to accelerate has slipped permanently from her grasp, redirected to the very children she endangered in pursuit of it. In trying to take everything from me, she lost everything that mattered. And the cruelest irony of all is that she still doesn't seem to understand why. Final update: 8 months later, the trial concluded last week. I debated whether to share this update at all. The media coverage was extensive, reporters camped outside the courthouse each day, and anyone curious enough could piece together the outcome from news reports and online discussions. But so many of you followed this story from the beginning, offered support during the darkest moments, sent messages of encouragement when I felt most alone, and asked to know how it ended. You deserve to hear it from me, in my own words, with the full weight of what it means. Shelby was convicted on all counts. Attempted murder in the first degree. 2 counts of reckless endangerment resulting in serious bodily harm to minors. Possession of a toxic substance with intent to cause death. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning their verdict, a speed that suggested the evidence left little room for doubt in their minds. Her defense team tried everything in their arsenal. They paraded a succession of psychologists and psychiatrists who spoke about situational stress, untreated anxiety disorders, and a possible personality disorder that went undiagnosed for decades. They painted a picture of a woman so overwhelmed by fear for her family's future, so consumed by grief over her father's death that she'd never properly processed, that she temporarily lost the ability to distinguish right from wrong. They argued that she needed treatment, not punishment. Compassion, not condemnation. The prosecution countered with the search history spanning 3 months. The text messages asking acquaintances about untraceable poisons. The test batch hidden in her garage. The fake spa certificate designed to confirm her plan was proceeding. The fact that Shelby had researched how long it would take for antifreeze to cause fatal organ damage and had specifically timed her gift to arrive right before a long holiday weekend, when emergency services would be stretched thin and a sudden illness in an aging woman might be dismissed as something mundane. Every element pointed to calculation, not chaos. Premeditation, not psychosis. A clear mind making devastating choices. I testified on the 3rd day of the trial. Sitting in that witness box, my hand on a leather-bound volume as I swore to tell the truth, looking across the courtroom at my daughter in her shapeless orange jumpsuit, it felt surreal. Like watching a movie about someone else's tragedy, like stepping outside my body and observing from a distance because the reality was too much to hold inside. The prosecutor walked me through the timeline with gentle precision, the strained relationship after Paul's death, the arguments about money that grew sharper each year, the chocolates arriving in the mail with a card claiming they were handmade with love, the terrifying phone call when Shelby learned her children had eaten what she prepared for me. I answered every question as calmly as I could, though my voice broke more than once. The defense attorney's cross-examination focused on trying to make me seem cold, distant, neglectful, the type of mother who prioritized extended family over her own daughter, who chose an in-law over her grandchildren, who drove Shelby to desperation through emotional unavailability. He brought up the money I'd given Arlene in extensive detail. He questioned my refusal to simply hand Shelby $50,000 when she'd asked, implying that a truly loving mother would have helped without conditions or questions. He suggested, without stating directly, that I bore some responsibility for driving her to such extreme measures. I kept my composure. When he finished his questions, having made little headway in shaking my testimony, the prosecutor asked if I had anything to add. I looked at the jury, 12 strangers who would decide my daughter's fate, and said this: I loved my daughter. I still do, in some broken way I can't fully explain or justify. But love doesn't erase actions. She spent months planning to kill me for money that wasn't hers, money she felt entitled to simply because I'm her mother. When her plan went wrong and she realized her own children might suffer the consequences of what she'd done, her first instinct wasn't to call for help, it was to run. To flee, to hide, to abandon them to whatever fate awaited. That tells you everything you need to know about who she is and what she values. The courtroom was silent when I stepped down from the witness stand. Sentencing happened yesterday. The judge had discretion within state guidelines, and I attended to hear his decision in person. Shelby stood when instructed, her attorney beside her looking grim, and listened as the judge delivered his remarks. He spoke about the severity of the crime and the profound betrayal it represented. About the violation of familial trust, the most sacred bond between parent and child turned into a weapon. About the two young children who were harmed through her reckless pursuit of an inheritance she was never entitled to claim through such means. About the complete absence of genuine remorse she demonstrated throughout the proceedings, not a single apology to me, to Derek, to Connor and Maddie, who still have nightmares about getting sick, who still ask their father why they can't see their mommy. 22 years. That was the sentence. 22 years in state prison, with possibility of parole after 15, contingent on good behavior and participation in rehabilitative programs. She'll be in her mid-50s when she's first eligible for release. Her children will be grown, Connor 26, Maddie 23, Ethan 20. Any relationship with them will be defined entirely by what she did rather than who she once was, by the years of absence and explanation and apology that can never fully bridge the gap she created. Shelby didn't react visibly when the sentence was announced. She stood motionless, staring straight ahead at nothing in particular, as if the words weren't registering or as if she'd already resigned herself to whatever came. Then the bailiff escorted her out through the side door, and that was it. The last time I'll see her, most likely, unless she files an appeal that requires my presence or unless I choose to visit her in prison, which I will not. I wish I could say I felt vindicated walking out of that courthouse. Triumphant. Satisfied that justice had been served and order restored. The truth is more complicated than that. The adrenaline of the past 8 months drained away all at once, leaving behind a profound weariness that settled into my bones. I felt empty in a way I didn't expect. Not sad, exactly, I'd spent all my tears months ago, but hollowed out, like something essential had been carved away. There is no winning in a situation like this. Only degrees of losing. I lost my daughter, not to the justice system, but years ago, to whatever poison took root in her heart long before she put poison in those chocolates. Derek lost his wife and the mother of his children, the future they'd planned together. Connor and Maddie lost their innocence and will carry scars, visible and invisible, for the rest of their lives. Their kidneys healed, but their trust in the world was shattered in ways that may never fully mend. Even little Ethan, spare the physical harm, will grow up with questions about why mommy went away and whether something he did caused it. These are wounds that don't heal cleanly. They scar over, become part of the landscape of your life, shape who you become in ways you can't always predict or control. But here's what I've learned in the wreckage of this past year: survival is its own form of victory. Getting up each morning even when everything in you wants to stay in bed. Finding moments of joy despite the shadow that follows you. Choosing love over bitterness, even when bitterness would be so much easier to hold on to. I've thrown myself into being the grandmother those kids deserve, the one constant, reliable presence in their upended world. Movie nights where we make popcorn and pile on the couch under blankets. Baking projects that leave the kitchen covered in flour and everyone laughing at the mess. Long afternoons at the park where the only agenda is swings and slides and chasing each other until we're breathless. Connor is starting to open up again, slowly, in fits and starts. He told me last week about a girl in his class he thinks is nice, the first time he's voluntarily shared anything in months. Maddie draws pictures for me every time I visit, rainbows and flowers and smiling suns, a child's insistence on finding beauty even in darkness. Ethan just wants to be chased around the yard, his laughter the purest sound I know. Derek and I have developed an unexpected friendship out of this tragedy. We meet for coffee once a week at a quiet cafe near his parents' house, comparing notes on the kids, venting about the ongoing complications of divorce proceedings and custody arrangements, and explaining to teachers and coaches why the children sometimes struggle. He's a good man who made the mistake of loving someone incapable of loving anyone more than herself. I don't blame him for any of it. I'm grateful for him, for his steadiness, for the way he's put his children first through everything. Marcus calls every night, just as he promised. His twins send me drawings and videos and endlessly enthusiastic updates about their lives in Seattle, dance recitals and swim lessons, and the discovery of a particularly excellent park near their school. They've asked to visit this summer, all 4 of them flying out for 2 weeks, and I'm already planning outings and activities, determined to fill their time with good memories that have nothing to do with their aunt's crimes. And Arlene. Sweet Arlene, who remembers less each day but still lights up when I walk into her room at the facility. Her face breaks into a smile the moment she sees me, even when she can't quite place who I am. The staff tells me she talks about me constantly between visits, calling me my person because she can't always retrieve my name. The money I spent on her care, the money Shelby thought she deserved more than this gentle, baiting woman, has bought my sister-in-law comfort, dignity, and kindness in her final chapter. I would make the same choice 1,000 times over without hesitation. Last week, I had the sprinkler system in my backyard repaired. A small thing, mundane, but it felt significant in a way I can't fully articulate. For months, I couldn't bring myself to plan for any future at all, not even the minor maintenance projects that come with homeownership. Everything felt temporary, uncertain, like the ground might shift at any moment. Now I'm looking ahead again. Not far, not with any grand ambitions, but at least forward rather than frozen in place. The house that Paul built, the house Shelby wanted me to sell, the house she tried to accelerate her inheritance of by ending my life, I'm keeping it. Every room holds memories of better times, of the family we once were before resentment and entitlement corroded it from within. I refuse to let what Shelby did drive me out of my own life, out of the home where I was happy, out of the future I still have the chance to build. Someone in the comments of my first post asked me if I regretted giving the chocolates to Derek and the kids instead of eating them myself. It's a question I've thought about in quiet moments, alone with my thoughts late at night. If I'd eaten them as intended, I would likely be dead right now, or at minimum, suffering severe organ damage that would have diminished whatever years I had left. The fact that I didn't, that my diabetes inadvertently saved my life, feels like life's strange way of intervening. But do I regret that Connor and Maddie were hurt instead? That's a harder question. The guilt is irrational. I know, I had no idea the chocolates were poisoned, and Shelby alone bears responsibility for the harm caused. Still, there are nights when I lie awake and imagine those children eating what was meant for me, trusting that anything Grandma shared must be safe, their faces lighting up at the sweetness before the sickness set in. The innocence of that trust, so brutally violated by their own mother, haunts me in ways I can't fully articulate or reason away. I've started seeing a therapist who specializes in trauma and grief. Our sessions are slow, difficult work, unpacking 34 years of motherhood, looking for signs I missed, grappling with the fact that sometimes people break in ways we can't fix or even understand. She tells me I need to release the guilt that doesn't belong to me, to stop searching for the mistake I made that caused all of this, to accept that Shelby's choices were her own. Some things, she says, aren't caused by anyone except the person who chose to do them. I'm working on believing her. This will be my last update on this story. I need to stop reliving it in writing and start simply living again. The trial is over. The sentence has been handed down. The legal system has done what it was designed to do. The rest of my life, however many years I have left, however many birthdays I celebrate, however many moments of joy I manage to find, stretches ahead, waiting to be filled with something other than this nightmare. To everyone who followed along, who offered words of support and encouragement, who shared their own stories of family betrayal and survival, who sent private messages checking in on me during the hardest weeks, thank you. Knowing I wasn't alone in navigating this darkness made it more bearable. Your kindness reminded me, on the hardest days, that most people are fundamentally good, even when the ones closest to us prove otherwise. Take care of each other. Hold your loved ones close. And if something ever feels wrong, if a gift seems too generous from someone who's been distant, if a gesture doesn't match the relationship, if your instincts whisper warnings you want to ignore, trust yourself. I wish I had trusted mine sooner. With gratitude and hope, Diane. Sometimes the people we love the most become unrecognizable, transformed by forces we cannot name or control, and no amount of devotion can alter the path they choose to walk. Diane's story reminds us that survival is not about winning or losing, it is about finding the courage to rebuild when everything shatters around you, to keep breathing when the air itself feels poisoned. In the end, the greatest response to those who sought to destroy us is simply this: refusing to be destroyed. Living fully despite the scars. Loving openly even when love has wounded us. Protecting those who still need us with everything we have left to give. The heart, though broken, possesses an extraordinary capacity to mend itself, and the future, though uncertain and shadowed by pain, always holds room for unexpected joy. May we all find the strength to walk forward, even when the path behind us lies in ruins, and may we never underestimate the quiet, persistent power of choosing hope over despair, connection over isolation, and light over the darkness that once threatened to consume us.